Someone was using my house. While I was gone, I used to think that if something truly bad was happening, I would know. There would be a clear sign. A noise too loud to ignore. A door wide open. Something obvious. That assumption is the only reason this went on as long as it did. I live alone in a quiet neighborhood. Not rural, not crowded. Just one of those places where nothing really happens. The kind of area where you stop locking your car every night because you've never had a reason not to. My routine was painfully consistent. Work, home, gym late at night, sleep, repeat. That's important. The first thing I noticed wasn't scary, it was annoying. One morning I couldn't find my coffee mug. I always left it by the sink. That day it was in the drying rack clean. I assumed I'd washed it the night before and forgotten. No big deal. A few days later, I noticed the bathroom trash had been taken out. I never take it out unless it's overflowing. Again, I blamed myself. The human brain is incredibly good at filling in gaps when the alternative is too uncomfortable. About 2 weeks later, I came home from the gym around 12:45 a.m. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed something off. My living room light was on. I always turn it off before I leave. Always. I sat in my car for almost a full minute, staring at the house, trying to remember if I'd broken that habit. Eventually, I convinced myself I must have been distracted. Inside, everything looked normal. Too normal. Nothing was out of place. No missing items. No mess. That somehow made it easier to ignore. The night things changed was a Wednesday. I woke up around 3 a.m., with that sudden, sharp awareness you get when something pulls you out of sleep. No dream. No sound that I could immediately identify. Just the feeling that I wasn't alone. I stayed still, listening. After about 10 seconds, I heard it. A soft sound, barely audible. Like fabric brushing against a wall, it came from the hallway. I held my breath. The sound stopped. I told myself it was the house settling. Older homes make noise. Everyone knows that. The next morning, my bedroom door was slightly open. I always close it before sleeping. That was the first time I felt real fear. I checked every room, every closet, every window. Everything was locked. That night, I stayed up later than usual. Lights off. TV muted. Just listening. Around 2:30 a.m., I heard footsteps. Slow, careful, deliberate. They weren't coming toward me. They were moving away. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, flooding the hallway with light. Nothing. Silence. I didn't sleep after that. The following day, I installed a cheap camera in the living room, not because I was convinced someone was there, but because I needed proof that I wasn't losing my mind. That night, I went to the gym like normal. When I came home and reviewed the footage, my hands started shaking. At 1:12 a.m., the camera recorded motion. The footage showed my front door opening. A man stepped inside. He moved like he knew the place. No hesitation. No looking around. He took off his shoes and set them neatly by the door. Then he walked straight out of frame. The timestamp showed he stayed inside my house for 3 hours. I don't remember breathing while I watched the rest. At 4:19 a.m., he reappeared, put his shoes back on, and left. Before exiting, he paused, turned toward the camera, and smiled. I didn't recognize him. The police arrived within minutes after I called. They searched the house and found what I somehow already knew was there. A sleeping setup in the crawl space above the garage. Bottled water. Food wrappers. A blanket. And something worse. Printed screenshots from my own social media. Photos of me at the gym, at work, with timestamps written underneath. The officer told me the man had likely been entering my house while I was gone for weeks, maybe months, using it like it was his. Sleeping when I wasn't home, watching when I was. They caught him 2 days later. He didn't resist, didn't speak, didn't look at me. The detective told me something I still think about. He said, "Most people imagine danger as something that breaks in. Sometimes it just lets itself in quietly and waits." I moved out. New locks, new cameras, new routines. but I still wake up sometimes at night listening for footsteps. Because the scariest part isn't knowing someone was inside my house. It's knowing how easy it was for me to believe they weren't. I thought I was alone at night. I never believed in the feeling of being watched. I used to think people who talked about it were paranoid, letting anxiety turn normal silence into something sinister. That belief didn't survive last winter. I live by myself in a quiet neighborhood where nothing ever happens. No break-ins, no noise complaints, no drama. The kind of place where nights feel dead and safe. At least, that's what I thought. It started with sleep. I began waking up at random times during the night, 2:17 a.m., 3:04 a.m., 4:36 a.m., with no explanation, no nightmares, no noises, just my eyes snapping open, heart already racing, like my body knew something my mind didn't. Every time I woke up, I felt the same thing. Pressure, like the air in my bedroom was heavier than it should have been. I'd lie there, staring at the ceiling, listening. Nothing ever happened. After a while, I'd convince myself I was being stupid and fall back asleep. Then small things started changing. My bedroom door would be open when I knew I'd closed it. The TV volume would be lower than I left it. Once I found my shoes moved from where I always kicked them off. I blamed exhaustion, stress, muscle memory. The brain will protect itself from the truth if the truth feels too dangerous. One night I decided to test myself. Before going to bed, I stacked 3 empty bottles against my bedroom door. If the door opened, they'd fall. Simple. I turned off the lights and got into bed. I didn't sleep. I lay there for hours staring at the darkness, listening to the quiet hum of my house. Around 3 a.m., I heard it. A soft scrape. Then plastic hitting the floor. I couldn't move. My door opened slowly. Not enough to see the hallway, just enough to break the seal of darkness. Someone was standing outside my room. I couldn't see them, but I could feel their presence. The air felt wrong, thicker, warmer. They didn't come in. They just stood there, listening. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab my phone. My body refused. Every instinct told me that making noise would be the worst thing I could do. After what felt like forever, the door closed again, softly. The next morning, the bottles were scattered across the floor. I called the police that day. They searched my house and found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no fingerprints, nothing missing. They suggested I might be sleepwalking. That night, I slept with the lights on. It didn't matter. At 2:48 a.m., I woke up to breathing, not mine. Slow, controlled, close. I opened my eyes and stared into the darkness. The breathing stopped. Then I felt it, a hand pressing lightly on the edge of my mattress. Testing. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. Minutes passed. The pressure lifted. Footsteps retreated. The next morning, I packed a bag and left. I stayed with a friend and told him everything. He laughed nervously and said stress can do crazy things to the mind. I almost believed him, until he showed me something. His security camera footage. At 3:11 a.m., someone was standing in my driveway, facing my house. Not moving, just watching. They stood there for over an hour before slowly walking away. I moved out a week later. New place, new locks, new city. But sometimes, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I still feel that same pressure in the room. And I don't open my eyes anymore. Because I'm terrified that one day, I'll see proof that I was never alone to begin with. Thought I was alone in my house, until I found the proof used to believe that if something truly bad was happening, I'd feel it immediately, like a switch flipping, panic, adrenaline, some clear moment where instinct takes over and tells you to run. That's not how it happened for me. What scares me most now is how normal everything felt while it was happening. I live alone in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where nothing really happens, no break-ins, no sirens at night, no suspicious activity on the community Facebook page. I work remotely, keep to myself, and follow the same routine almost every day. Grocery delivery on Sundays, gym late at night, lights out by midnight. That routine is why I miss the signs. The first thing I noticed was a sound. It was around 2:15 a.m. on a Wednesday. I was half asleep on the couch, TV still glowing quietly, when I heard a dull thud come from somewhere behind me. Not loud, not sharp, just wrong, like something being gently dropped. I muted the TV and listened. Nothing. I told myself it was the house settling. Old houses make noises, everyone knows that. I checked the back door anyway. Locked. Windows closed. I went to bed and forgot about it by morning. The next day, I noticed the back door handle felt loose. Not broken, just twisted. Like someone had pulled on it too hard. I remember standing there with my hand on the knob, frowning, trying to remember if I'd noticed it before. I shrugged it off and added, "fix door" to my mental to-do list. That night, I went to the gym like usual. When I pulled back into my driveway around 12:30 a.m., my porch light was off. I always leave it on. I sat in my car longer than I should have, replaying my day, trying to remember turning it off. I eventually convinced myself I must have. Inside, everything looked normal. Too normal. But that was the first time I walked through every room before going to bed. Thursday morning, my phone battery was at 9%. The charger was plugged into my phone, but not the outlet. That bothered me more than it should have. I don't unplug my phone in my sleep. I don't sleepwalk. And even if I did, why unplug it and leave the cable connected? That night, I didn't turn the TV on. I sat in silence. Around 3 a.m., I heard it again. Slow, deliberate thumps coming from the back of the house, not loud enough to be footsteps, but too heavy to be an animal. I held my breath and listened until my chest hurt. The sound stopped. The next morning, I found muddy marks on the floor near the back door. They weren't clear footprints. No tread pattern. Just smeared shapes, like someone tried to wipe their feet before walking inside. My stomach dropped. I checked the door frame closely and noticed faint scratch marks around the lock. Thin, subtle, like someone had worked at it patiently. I called a locksmith that afternoon and told him the lock was faulty. He replaced it and reassured me everything was secure. I didn't tell him about the marks. Saying it out loud felt like admitting something I wasn't ready to face. That night, I pushed a chair under the back door handle and locked my bedroom door. At 3:47 a.m., I woke up to a sound I will never forget. Soft tapping, not knocking. Fingertips. Testing my bedroom door. I lay perfectly still, staring at the darkness, my eyes burning because I was too afraid to blink. The tapping stopped. I heard slow footsteps retreating down the hall. In the morning, the chair was still under the back door. The door was unlocked. I called the police. They searched the house, found nothing, and gently suggested I might have unlocked it myself. They were kind, calm, skeptical. That night, I didn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., I noticed the basement door was cracked open. It had been closed. I stood at the end of the hallway, staring at that thin line of darkness. Every instinct screamed at me not to go closer. I did anyway. Through the gap, I saw the outline of someone standing at the bottom of the stairs. Not moving, not breathing loudly, just there. I slammed the door and ran. Police came again. This time, they found him. He was barefoot, dirty, silent. They led him out in handcuffs without him ever looking at me. Later, an officer asked how often I left the house at night. They found food wrappers, bottled water, and a phone charger hidden behind the furnace in the basement. Someone had been living there, watching. Days later, I was scrolling through my phone when I found the photo. It was me, asleep in my bed, taken at 3:11 a.m. I don't live alone anymore, but I still lock my door, and I still listen. Because sometimes the worst part isn't knowing you're not alone. It's realizing how long you never noticed. I didn't know someone was living in my walls. I've lived in the same apartment for almost 3 years, and until last winter, I thought I knew every sound it made. The building is old. Pipes knock, radiators hiss, floorboards creak when the temperature drops. I learned early on what noises were normal and which ones weren't. That's why the sound I heard one night stood out immediately. It was scratching. Not loud, not frantic. Slow. Careful. Like someone dragging their fingernails across drywall, testing how much pressure they could apply without being heard. It came from the wall behind my bed. I sat up and listened, heart pounding, telling myself it had to be mice. Old buildings get mice. Everyone knows that. Still, something about the rhythm bothered me. Too deliberate, too controlled. The sound stopped as soon as I moved. I lay back down and stared at the ceiling until morning. The next day, I noticed the smell. At first, it was faint, musty, sour, like damp clothes left too long in a washing machine. I opened windows, cleaned the kitchen, blamed the weather. But no matter what I did, the smell lingered strongest in my bedroom. That night, I heard the scratching again. This time it moved. It started behind my bed, then slowly traveled along the wall toward the closet. I pressed my ear against the drywall and felt something I wasn't prepared for. Warmth. Not heat from pipes. Not residual warmth. Body warmth. I jumped back so hard I fell off the bed. I didn't sleep that night. Over the next week, strange things kept happening. Food went missing, small amounts at first. A slice of bread, half a protein bar. I assumed I was forgetting until I found crumbs behind my couch where I never ate. My bathroom mirror fogged in the mornings even when I hadn't showered. Once I came home to find my bedroom window unlocked. I never unlocked it. I called maintenance and told them I thought there were animals in the walls. They checked quickly, barely looked, and said they didn't hear anything. One guy joked that I probably just had ghost rats. That night, I heard whispering. Not words. Breathing. Slow, controlled breathing coming from inside the wall. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone shaking in my hand, debating whether to call the police. What would I even say? Hello, I think someone is breathing inside my wall. At 2:17 a.m., my bedroom outlet stopped working. My phone charger died. The whispering stopped at the same time. The next morning, I noticed something new. A thin crack running vertically up the wall, right where the sound usually came from. It hadn't been there before. I pressed on it gently. The wall flexed. That's when I knew. Something wasn't living behind my wall. It was living inside it. I packed a bag and went to stay with a friend for a few days. I didn't tell her why. I just said my apartment was being renovated. While I was gone, I installed a small security camera in my bedroom, pointed at the wall. On the second night, I checked the footage. At 3:04 a.m., the wall moved. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. The crack widened slightly, then closed again. At 3:11 a.m., a fingernail pushed through. I dropped my phone. When I forced myself to look again, the footage showed a face, pressed sideways inside the wall, one eye visible through the crack, watching the room, watching my bed. Police took it seriously after that. They evacuated the building and opened the walls. Inside the space between my apartment and the next unit, they found him. A man in his late 40s, emaciated, dirty, barefoot. He had carved out a narrow living space using stolen tools, insulation for bedding, and food taken from multiple apartments. He knew everyone's schedules. He knew when people slept. He avoided noise, avoided attention. They said he'd been there for months. When officers asked why he chose my apartment, he didn't answer at first. Then he smiled and said, "You listened." That's what still haunts me. Not that he was there, but that he knew I could hear him, and stayed anyway. I moved out immediately. Even now, in a new place with solid walls and neighbors close by, I still wake up at night listening. Because once you realize walls aren't always solid, you never stop wondering what might be listening back. Before I tell this story, I need you to understand something. I'm not reckless, I'm not careless, and I don't scare easily. I grew up camping with my father. He taught me how to survive in the woods, how to read tracks, how to listen to silence. I've slept in forests before, alone, with friends, in all kinds of weather. But what happened last winter made me swear I would never camp alone again, especially in winter. I had taken a few days off work because I needed space. Not a vacation, not fun, just distance from people, from noise, from everything that felt heavy in my life at the time. So I packed my truck with camping gear, winter supplies, and my dog Roscoe. Roscoe was a large mixed breed, protective, alert, and smarter than most people I know. If I felt safe going out there at all, it was because of him. I drove deep into a state forest, following a narrow road that barely qualified as maintained. Snow covered everything. The trees were thick, tall, and endless. After nearly an hour without seeing another vehicle, I pulled into a small, overgrown turnout that looked like it hadn't been used in years. From there, I hiked another 20 minutes into the woods. I found a clearing surrounded by dense trees. The snow was untouched. No footprints, no tire tracks, no signs of recent human presence. That's what I wanted. I set up my tent as the sun began to sink. The temperature dropped fast, the ground was frozen solid, and hammering the stakes took real effort. Roscoe stayed close, circling the clearing, occasionally stopping to sniff the air. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Once camp was set, I gathered dead wood and built a small fire. I cooked dinner and sat on a log watching the flames dance. The forest was silent. And I mean silent. My dad once told me that snow absorbs sound, and sitting there that night I finally understood what he meant. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It felt like the woods were holding their breath. That's when Roscoe stood up. He stared into the trees and let out a low bark. I didn't panic. Deer were common in that area, and Roscoe had barked at them before. I told him to relax, and after a moment, he sat back down. But he never took his eyes off the tree line. About 20 minutes later, he barked again, this time louder. Then I heard it. Footsteps, slow, heavy, crunching through snow. I stood up immediately. The footsteps stopped. Roscoe went completely silent, his body stiff, ears pinned forward. That was the first moment I felt genuine fear. At the edge of the firelight, I saw a shape standing just beyond the trees. A man, half hidden in shadow, watching me. I called out, trying to keep my voice calm, saying he startled me and that I was just camping with my dog. He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold and flat. He asked what I was doing out there, that deep in the woods. Something about his tone felt wrong, not curious, not friendly. I told him I was armed, not as a threat, just the truth. He laughed quietly and said something about how people had no hospitality anymore. Then he turned and walked back into the darkness. His footsteps faded into the woods. I stood there for a long time after that, staring at the trees. Roscoe stayed glued to my side. Eventually, I convinced myself the man had just been another camper, or maybe a hunter passing through. But deep down, I knew that explanation didn't fit. I put out the fire completely. No flames, no embers. I didn't want light drawing attention. Inside the tent, I layered everything: thermal clothes, hat, gloves, and cinched my winter sleeping bag tight around my shoulders. Roscoe curled up beside me, his body heat helping more than anything else. I lay there listening to the silence. Then Roscoe growled. Footsteps again. Slower this time. Closer. They stopped right outside the tent. I could hear someone shifting their weight in the snow, just standing there. Roscoe began to howl. I whispered for him to stop, terrified that whoever was outside would react. My hand was shaking as I grabbed my gun. I didn't want to use it. I've never shot anyone. I didn't even know if I could. But I couldn't stay silent anymore. I cocked the gun and said clearly that I was armed and that whoever was there needed to leave now. For a few seconds, there was nothing. Then the footsteps started again, moving away. Slowly at first, then faster, until they disappeared into the woods. I didn't unzip the tent. I didn't look outside. I stayed frozen for hours. Roscoe never relaxed. Not once. I barely slept. When I did, it was in short, shallow bursts. The moment the sky began to lighten, I packed everything as fast as I could. I didn't eat. I didn't look around. I just left. We hiked back to my truck at dawn and drove away. I never went back to that forest, and I never will. Because being alone in the woods doesn't always mean you're alone. Sometimes it just means you're the only one who doesn't belong there. I thought leaving would make it stop. That once I got back onto the main road, once the trees thinned out and the world felt normal again, whatever had followed me in that forest would stay there. I was wrong. The drive home felt longer than it should have. Every time my headlights caught a roadside sign or a reflective marker, my chest tightened. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone standing in the road behind me, watching the truck disappear into the distance. Roscoe sat upright the entire drive, eyes fixed forward, refusing to lie down. When I finally reached home, the relief I expected never came. I unpacked my gear mechanically, barely aware of what I was doing. Snow still clung to the bottom of my boots, melting onto the floor. The silence of my house felt different from the silence of the woods. Thinner, fragile, like it could break at any second. That night, I slept with every light on. Roscoe stayed at the foot of my bed, head up, growling softly at nothing I could see. I told myself it was paranoia, but paranoia doesn't explain what happened next. 2 nights later, I woke up just before 3 a.m. No noise. No dream. Just that sudden, sickening awareness that something was wrong. Roscoe was standing at the bedroom door, not barking, not growling, just staring down the hallway. Slowly, I sat up and listened. At first, I heard nothing. Then, very faintly, I heard it. Footsteps. Not outside. Inside my house. Soft. Careful. Like someone who knew exactly how to move without being heard. Roscoe's lips curled back, his body trembling. That was when I realized something that made my stomach drop. The footsteps sounded familiar. The same slow, deliberate rhythm I'd heard in the snow. I reached for my phone, heart pounding, and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut down the hallway, illuminating empty space. The footsteps stopped. I didn't move, and I didn't breathe. After what felt like minutes, I heard a door close somewhere in the house. Not slammed, just gently shut, as if whoever did it didn't want to wake anyone. There was only one problem. I lived alone. I checked the house at sunrise, armed and shaking. Every door was locked, every window secured. Nothing was missing, except one thing. Mud. Thin streaks of dried mud near the back door. Not enough to be obvious, just enough to notice if you were already looking. I scrubbed it away and told myself it meant nothing. But that night I dreamed of the forest. I dreamed of standing in my tent, unable to move, while someone stood just outside, breathing. When I woke up, Roscoe was staring at the corner of my bedroom, growling. I sold my camping gear a week later. I stopped hiking, stopped going anywhere remote. Even crowded places felt safer than silence. Sometimes late at night when the house is completely still, I swear I hear footsteps moving slowly through rooms I'm not in. Always careful, always patient. And I don't know what scares me more. The idea that something followed me home, or the possibility that it never left the woods at all and is simply waiting for me to come back.